Welcome, my friends and disciple. It is November 13th, 2024. We're looking at our Disciple Fast Tracked Old Testament Study Manual, Chapter 8. The keyword is security, and the title is The People with the King. We're on page 60, reading our human condition, then going to flip over to page 66 for our Mark of Discipleship. I'm going to rephrase that, and then we're going to be turning to 1 Samuel 8. So if you're following along online, whether you're someone who missed this week or hundreds of years from now, because YouTube surely will exist for a very long time. If you're my great-great-great-grandchild, what does Dad, Grandpa Smith believe about the Bible? Here we are, talking about Kingship and Temple, big stories of Samuel, David, Saul, and Solomon, and how the people of God find themselves in the world as they've come into this new land. So as they've established in this new land after their sort of series with Joshua taking the land, judges trying to figure out who they are in the land as leaders, we come to our human condition on page 60, and it says, we demand leaders, hoping they will bring security and peace. We want our leaders to make decisions for us, to tell us what to do so we won't have to take responsibility for ourselves and our actions. But power tends to corrupt, and we discover our leaders, like us, have feet of clay. Woo. Seems like disciple toys with us as we get these two chapters on leaders always right after election season. Let's move way over to chapter 66 to our Mark of Discipleship, and it says this. Disciples maintain a perspective on leadership that supports and respects godly leaders but give true allegiance only to God. That is a fine Mark of Discipleship. As I've been thinking this week about how I would rephrase that, I think I would say something along the lines of our leaders and our place of worship matter. They are important. They shape who we are. The other potential question I had, our question of the week was, tell me about your favorite leader and why. And if you'd like to do that, if you're watching this no matter when, text me that. I would love it. I think looking back and discerning what God has done for us is an important task. The second one was going to be, tell me about a place in which you're safe. Tell me about a safe place for you. That was my second question. We don't have time for that tonight, but as the chapter title, keyword is security. The people of God, as they've moved into this land, they are trying to ask the question, what do we do now with this land? And as I mentioned, some of this is going to be overlap from last week. We talked about how the people of God have been understood themselves as kind of a nomadic people following after a God with a tabernacle. And so they were kind of following after a God with fire by night and cloud by day, and they were kind of a people on the move, and now they've solidified themselves in this promised land, and now they're going to try to kind of figure out, in some ways, the politics of being together. How are we going to choose leaders, divide our governance, and figure out our worship? Like, how are we going to figure this out now? And so by the time we get to the end of this chapter, we are going to be a completely different looking group of people. Our ancestors look way different. By the time we get to the end of this chapter than we are when we take the land in Joshua. Actually, couldn't be more different. And so sometimes it's actually interesting to me to be like, this one 25-minute lesson is going to take you through 2 whole semesters of college to get to a place of figuring out like where we've come from and where we're going. Because next week we're going to jump right into exile. But in order to understand exile, you have to understand how we got to a people who understood ourselves as people who were no longer a nomadic people worshiping in the tabernacle, but a people who understood themselves as following after kingship and temple. And so I'm going to show you a map. I'm going to go to this. Okay, this is modern day Europe, and moving into sort of the bottom of here this is Africa, and this is Russia over here. This is a modern day globe or map. I want to zoom in on the area in which it's going to be right in this lower right-hand corner. Okay, that's where we're going to kind of zoom into. This is going to be a modern day picture of kind of the location geographically where we find ourselves. Okay, so you see Jerusalem right here. You see sort of, the news has been talking a lot about the Gaza Strip and the issue with Palestine. You've got Egypt right here, and you've got modern day Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Egypt. So those are important factors and stories within the story of God. So if you take this back not to a modern day picture, but to the ancient Near East, this is another good picture of what we're talking about. So you've got Egypt and the Nile River, the Mediterranean Sea, got the Dead Sea, the Sea of Galilee in this area right here. And then up here you've got the Euphrates River and the Tigris River. And we're going to find ourselves as the waterways are going to be really important for us. So when you zoom in on the land of Canaan, this is going to be the Sea of Galilee, this is the Dead Sea, and this is the Jordan River. So those are important words and phrases that you've heard in Scripture. Some of you have not looked at Bible maps before, may not know what that looks like or where they're located within kind of the system geographically. And this is going to be the Great Sea or the Mediterranean Sea. There's going to be down here is going to be where Jerusalem is. You can see my little marker right on Jerusalem. And then Shechem's going to be up here, which is kind of the northern kingdom. And we're going to divide between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. In the interest of time, I'm going to flip over a couple of different slides, and then I'm going to draw a map on the board. So, timeline. This is the kind of stuff that would show up on your Bible Jeopardy quiz that I focused a lot on 10 years ago. Not as necessarily focused on you winning Bible Jeopardy, but the teacher in me still is like, well, you can do better at Bible Jeopardy than your family if you want to. So, in 1220 BCE, that's when we have the start of last week's chapter. That's when Joshua leads the people into the land of Canaan. So that's kind of the start of this geographical movement into this region. That's very important. Okay, so about 200 years later, that's going to be the time of Joshua through the Judges. You're going to be having the beginning of the monarchy. So that's about 200 years. This is helpful for me because when I was a kid, no one told me the timelines or everyone just kind of maybe assumed that I knew this, but so they take the land, 200 years go by, then they're like, you know what? We are going to be a people who need to have a solidified governance. It was Judy Cox that told me many years ago. I used to teach this lesson at the 1 Samuel 8, being so frustrated the people of God were like, why couldn't they just trust God? And she was like, Jason, when you inhabited a place, have some empathy for people who wanted a leader and who wanted to kind of have some security. I was like, well, Judy, always so empathetic. 1020 is when the start of the Saul-David Solomonic governance happens for the kings. And then so this is what we're going to call the Kingdom of Israel, which at the time of Saul and David and Solomon is going to be all of Israel. And so Israel and Judah, Israel's going to be up here, and this is Judah, is going to become split just 100 years after the start of the kingship time period. And so no one kind of helped. By the time we get to the end, and some of you had a chance to read, some of you didn't, by the time we get to the end of this chapter, the kingdom of Israel is going to be split into two, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And we need to know that because exile next week, there's going to be an exile of the northern kingdom, and then there's going to be an exile of the southern kingdom. And if you didn't know there was a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom, how would that make sense to you? So this is just, I'm going to go through that just quickly again, just so you can kind of, maybe some of you are taking little notes in your books. So you've got 1220, we take the land. 1020, beginning of the kings. And then 920, the division of the northern and southern kingdom. So that is a pretty quick steps. I'm actually going to briefly draw on the board for us, using my markers, a simpler diagram that helps me to kind of understand exactly where we are. That has been helpful for me in years past. Even though that's probably better, I just draw this simple diagram because it's like, okay, I know I can work with this. Make sense? So you have the Mediterranean Sea. I'm going to put some water in this sea so you know that circle is filled up with water and the land around it. And this is going to be really significant. Again, our worldview at the time, still 1000 BCE, is going to be a non-heliocentric world. So the world, everybody's going to believe that the sun rotates around the earth, and they're going to believe, and most people are going to believe in kind of a flat earth. End of the world's going to be over here, and the end of the world's probably going to be, let's say, Tarshish, kind of the end of Spain, right? So that's going to be kind of like the end of the world over here. So then you've got this little piece of land right here that we're going to say is the Promised Land. And so you're going to have 3 bodies of water in the Promised Land. You're going to have the Dead Sea down here, the Sea of Galilee, and then the Jordan River. Those are going to be your 3 main. You've heard those your whole life. Okay, if you're looking at me, you're looking at me. And I think you're interested. So thank you. You're so interested. But like when you see this on the map, like, oh, okay, this is interesting. And so as you can imagine, Mediterranean Sea, these three bodies of water, and then three more bodies of water. You're going to have the Nile River, which is going to be Egypt. And then up here, you're going to have these two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. And so when you hear about kind of the ancient Near Eastern world, you need to be able to know these bodies of water to be able to make sense of the whole world, especially when we talk about what chaos looks like, you know, how water is so important, the waterways are so important. So you really can't live without these bodies of water, especially as you're moving from a nomadic people to be a settled people when you need crops. This will lead us into understanding the kind of ancient Near Eastern gods that matter when it comes to building crops and families. So those are actually, this is actually, so much of this has to make sense geographically for us to make it sense theologically. This is the teacher in me that's like, yes, I want you to know all of these timelines and words and phrases and geography. So the people of God start here with Abram. They go down to Egypt town in the brickyard, and then they move back here, and Joshua takes the land. So this is 1220 to 1020, and then 922, you're going to have this split of the northern kingdom. It's not a great line. It should probably be more like 70-30 than 50-50. But Jerusalem's going to be, okay, it's bothering me, so I'm going to change it. This is going to be a little bit smaller down, 60-40, 70-30. Judah's smaller than Jerusalem. That's the capital of Jerusalem, which is the capital of Judah. And this is going to be the northern kingdom of Israel. You know this is Egypt, and this is the Nile. You know this is the Mediterranean Sea. You know this is the Tigris and the Euphrates. That's a quick little map that you can kind of I probably will draw this the next 3 weeks, just because I kind of feel like once you get to know this, then when John's going to preach about Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, you're going to be like, oh, I can see what's happening in the world. So I'm going to get to my last little move, but what's going to happen in the future is that there's going to be an Assyrian exile of the northern kingdom of Israel. So a kingdom from the north is going to come out of the north and is going to capture the northern kingdom of Israel. That's going to happen in like, okay, the dates will come next week. I'm getting too far. But then there's going to be a second exile. It's going to be the Babylonian exile. And they're going to come down and capture both the Assyrian lands and the southern kingdom of Judah and Jerusalem. And then there's going to be the return of the land when King Cyrus is going to come and he's going to kind of take all of the land with the Persian Empire. So the map starts with this. We just had a newcomer, so I'm going to just do a little recap for my friend in the back. I'm not going to call you out. You know you're on YouTube. So Mediterranean Sea, the land, the kind of the promised land, is going to be the northern kingdom of Israel, and then it's going to be Judah, or the southern kingdom of Israel. Then here's Egypt and the Nile River. You've got the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. So for us to understand, when we started this chapter, it was about 1220 BCE. That was last week when Joshua took the land. This week's going to be about 1020 BCE, 200 years when we've got the kingship. Kingship's going to last about 100 years before it's split into the northern kingdom and southern kingdom of Israel. And so you're going to have, next week, we're going to fill in the dates to this map to know kind of where the periods of exile are going to be coming. So I will draw this map again next week and probably the week after, just because I'm someone who thinks that repetition really matters. But also I just kind of think that over time, when you can kind of be like, oh, that's kind of where we find ourselves. I'm actually going to fill in those other two dates. The Assyrian Empire is going to be 722. The Babylonian exile is going to be 587. So just as a reminder, in BCE, our timeline is going to be working backwards. So 1200 is later than 1000, then 900, then 700, then 587. So those are kind of like your big dates numbers And again, when I first started this class, boy, did I care about those numbers. I do think they matter because they kind of give you a big picture of what's going on, but I will redraw this the next couple of weeks, especially for those who aren't here and who couldn't see the board as well as maybe I wanted them to. So that is a little picture of what is happening geographically. Oh, I forgot about my final home move. I practiced this last night. I haven't done this before. So the way I've been thinking about this, this may not be great. You have to bear with me. The way that I've been thinking about this is if I were to overlay.
I was thinking that.
Were you really?
I really was.
That's awesome. If I were to overlay. Yeah. If I were to overlay the United States of America on this map to help you understand what's going on, I would be able to say, and again, so it's so Oklahoma-centric if I can do this, right? The promised land. The land of the red dirt. We are in Oklahoma. Everything we dreamed of. Right. It's a dream. It's first time. This is my first time. I did just last night. As I was looking at the map, I was like, how could I? But guess what? You know, the Texans, and I know some of you OU fans recognize the evil Texans of the South have come up, and we are enslaved in the land of Texas. The Red River becomes this demarcation that we need to get back to the promised land. What does God do? He brings us out of Texas, out of the land of slavery, out of the brickyard, brings us back into the land, right? And so we're home. We're home. But guess what? Those Midwesterners up at the Great Lakes, they see. In years to come, we've got a Michigander up here who's just like homeland. So the Michiganders up here are like, you know what? We really like that Oklahoma land. Now, this is when it gets a little bit of a stretch. But they come down and they conquer Oklahoma. They conquer Oklahoma. And so next week I'm going to continue this. I'm going to continue this kind of map because if I can get it in your brain, you're in Oklahoma, you've gone to Texas, you've returned to Texas. But now the people in Michigan and Ohio have just done a disaster on us and our land. And then we're going to figure out what happens when, you might help me as a Midwesterner, you might have Ohio come and then Michigan?
Maybe Pennsylvania.
Okay.
You could say like Michigan and then Pennsylvania.
Okay.
We could talk New England.
Okay, we could talk some New England.
Yeah.
Oh, that might be good. Like we might do like Michigan and then like the Yankees.
Yeah.
So like the Wolverines and the Yankees, we could get some real college football language in here. The Wolverines from the north come down and destroy, but the Yankees are the empire, the evil empire of all things. This is actually really good. I'll workshop this for next week. We'll really get down to it. But what I wanted you to give was like, okay, how can I find some commonality? Because even when we get to the book of Revelation, when you hear the words, but you can't put it on a map, right? How do you know what's happened, right? And so this, I think, maybe will give you just like a little bit of a clue or a hint to place yourself geographically to know, okay, I know what's happening. Those Wolverines from the north have come down and taken us away, right? And so when we talk about these moments, a lot of it is politics, because politics is not just what we see in modern day Republicans and Democrats and the kind of the crass fighting that we find ourselves in because I think politics is kind of a dirty word, right? But politics is actually kind of just like the work of the people, right? Like it I will show my cards so much. It really matters. Like how you organize yourself and the leaders that you have really matters. There are implications in how you organize your life, and that's politics. And so in order for us to be able to kind of understand how the people of God understood their own politics matters, but location matters. And I hope that this can give you kind of just a glimpse of where we find ourselves. For those of you who are online, I'm sorry about my inability to use a camera and a computer at the same time on a whiteboard. But that's kind of where we find that picture. I'll work maybe with Liam about kind of like these different kingdoms coming from the north. And actually, if I can do some work, I may do some little overlaying just to kind of see like the United States is so big, as far as like geographically big compared to Europe. But Iraq and Turkey and Mediterranean Sea are pretty big, so I might be able to do some actual like overlaying maps. I'm very excited. So that gets us to, it's gone way too long, but that's been a fun thing to think about. I hope that gives you a kind of okay, here's kind of geographically where we find ourselves. That was helpful for even me this week because I have looked at Bible maps before and it's been like, I've never been there. I never maybe will ever go there. And so what does it make sense to me? It's just like lines and words. So hopefully I can give you that sort of glimpse. I think that's very important. So we're going to go to 1 Samuel 8, about 20 minutes after I planned. Our thesis becomes here, 1 Samuel 8. You need to know going into this, the heartbeat of God was that the people would be priestly kingdom, holy nation. As they were coming out of the land of slavery into the promised land, they were to be priestly kingdom and holy nation, the very embodiment of the personhood of Yahweh for the world, to be a light to the nations, that they would be not like other nations, but they would be the light to other nations, that they would be reflecting God's image to the world, keeping the Ten Commandments, following after the ways of God, and that they would kind of shine like a light in the dark, and that they would love everybody and change the whole world as a light to all people. Well, we found last week in Joshua and Judges that the people of God failed and forgot time and again to embody the very image of Yahweh in the world. And that becomes sort of a theme throughout the Old Testament. People of God forget. So there's this cry, I think, in God's heart for the people of God and in good Joshua and in good leaders and people who follow after God and follow after the ways of God to be able to be those two words, priestly kingdom, holy nation, set apart, not like other nations. And at the beginning of 1 Samuel 8, you're going to have just more forgetfulness. So let's turn our hearts here. Boy, this is a tough spot, but 1 Samuel 8, verse 4. Then the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not follow in your ways." Forgetfulness comes in again in the story of God. "Appoint for us then a king to govern us like other nations." Okay, this is a pointed verse that is essentially challenging the whole thesis and project. Like, we don't want the project that you've assigned to us. So we want to be like other nations. But this thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to govern us." Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said, "Listen to the voice of the people and all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. Just as they have done to me from this day, I brought them out of the land of Egypt, forsaking me and serving other gods." The sadness. Can you feel the sadness in the moment? "So also they are doing to you. Now listen to their voice. Only you should solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who will reign over them." So Samuel goes to the people of God, and there's going to be two words I want you to take notice of. One is the word he or his. The second word is the word take. Because he is going to prophesy about what's going to happen. Now, does he predict the future, or does he just know how kings operate? Listen to what he believes kings will do, and it is my interpretation that not just a few years later, this is what kings do under the people of God. So Samuel reported all these to the Lord to the people who were asking for a king. He said, 1 Samuel 8, verse 11, "These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots, to be his churchmen, to run his chariots. He will appoint for himself commanders, to plow his ground and reap his harvest." Verse 13, "He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers." Verse 14, "He will take the best of your fields and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 of your grain, verse 16. He will take your male and female slaves, verse 17. He will take 1/10 of your flocks. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. So they've heard, he will take, 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 and this is how they respond. Verse 19. But the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel. They said, no, but we are determined to have a king over us, so that we also may be like other nations, and that our king may govern us and go out before us and fight our battles. When Solomon had heard all these words of the people, he repeated them to the ears of the Lord. The Lord said to Samuel, listen to their voice and set a king over them. Samuel then said to the people of Israel, each of you return home. In the very first paragraph of chapter 9, Saul, who stands head and shoulders above everyone else, is later going to become king. The empathy comes in that the people of God needed to find ways to govern themselves. Yet there can still be sadness and the loss of a project that the people of God might be priestly kingdom and holy nation for the world. The deep sadness in verse 20, which says, so that we also may be like other nations, and that our king may govern us and go out before us and fight our battles. The deep sadness and irony of that is that there are many people who believe the message of Joshua and Judges is that that's who Yahweh was for the people of God in Joshua and Judges. That it wasn't the people of God who found themselves successful. It was God himself who was fighting their battles and who was there for them in time of need. And that will be the witness of the thesis of some people when they read the books of Joshua and Judges. People of God aren't successful. It's that God is successful when the people of God surrender themselves to the mission of God. And so this chapter becomes, for me, the chapter that we look at most exclusively in this big story of Kingship and Temple. Now, we're going to have Saul give way to David. The story of David is going to be summed up in 30 seconds. I mean, that's, again, a whole semester of what we're talking about. David is going to find himself moving to Solomon. So you've got the story of Samuel, Saul, David, and Solomon. These big four characters who are the future kings and kings of Israel. In that story of David and Solomon, you're going to have the building of a temple that is going to move the people away from a nomadically worshiping people to a people who are going to understand themselves as secure in their both political world of a king and a security in the place of worship that's going to be the temple in Jerusalem. This is going to end up being what we call the first temple period. So these are big terms and big words that we're going to find ourselves in. And I see some of you taking notes, and it's really because some of this is new to some of you to be able to kind of figure out, like, how do we get where we're going? I have felt like I've done a longer job than I wanted to geographically, but I had a lot of fun to get us to where we are, because I feel like I get so excited about exile that I almost skip to exile because it's my favorite portion of Scripture. I took all 3 semesters from Marty Michelson. It's the most I've read. It's the most I've studied. If you're going to say, like, what's your best Old Testament stuff, I would say I'm an exile guy. Pre-exilic, exilic, post-exilic. I love that stuff. That's kind of the where I hang in the Old Testament. It's probably the stuff I find most hopeful and fun too. And so, surprise, I get super pumped about the rest of the Old Testament because I almost think we're just starting the story. And so, but I don't think I've set you well. I think I've set you up better tonight geographically, but maybe not with the theological characters in the story. So again, Saul to Samuel to Saul to David to Solomon is going to be in the passing down of the kingship line. And there's going to be a few moments, especially in the story of David, that is going to have the people of God understand themselves as secure. There's that key word again. The security that they will be a people led in the line of David, this Davidic king lineage that's going to have them be this kind of priestly family that's going to always kind of be in charge politically of the people of God. That's going to be kind of this promise that the people of God begin to understand themselves as where they find themselves, as following after the Davidic line. Now, Solomon is going to be in that Davidic line, and Solomon is going to kind of finally build the temple of God. At the end of Solomon's reign, you're going to have some trouble within that line, and there's going to be a split in the northern kingdom and southern kingdom of Israel. And no longer, after just 100 small, short years, you're going to have the split of that kingdom. And you're going to have a northern kingdom with its capital and a southern kingdom with its capital, which to me is like, again, I'm just getting close to 8 o'clock. I feel like I've hopefully you've had a meaningful night tonight. I feel like, well, where did my time go? But I hope that you kind of know when we come into next week, when we talk about the map again, and I'll draw it in a quicker way, but I'll have really good examples of each of either college football or Major League Baseball teams, maybe even some pro football teams to be able to help us out, figure out where we're coming from, to be able to place you in a spot to know what is happening in the world geographically and politically. So need you to know, just to kind of sum up, last week we entered into the promised land about 1220. The kings come into our world about 1020. And then just 100 short years later, we've divided into two kingdoms. And if we had more time, we would explore some of the political and theological disagreements that lead to those divisions. Some of you had a chance to read about some of those weeks, some of you didn't. I think that's really kind of fascinating and interesting. But you need to know that the people of God felt secure in their place, that they had a king in the line of David and a temple in which to worship. And they began to build their liturgy around one place, and they felt safe at home with their king and their temple. Just like we feel safe in our preferred political party and oftentimes our place of worship, or the place where we find our family. So when you think about that second question, it's about where do you feel safe? You can think about a home, a church home, a restaurant, just a place. And when you think about that place, you're almost like your body chemistry changes. Does that make sense? Like, okay, when you think about when you feel a place you feel safe, some of you are thinking about a particular living room around maybe a Thanksgiving meal, and you're like, for some of you it's a church. Some of you don't feel safe with your family system, and you're like, you know what? I feel safe here at this church, or at a childhood church back home, or in an old gym. So the place matters deeply to all of us, and it mattered deeply to the people of God, so much so it began to be the cornerstone of who they became. That temple was how they interacted with Yahweh. And I'm doing my best to shortly talk about how important that is. But you need to know, moving into what's happening with the people of God in the next few chapters, because there's going to be a both loss of kingship and temple. And then the people of God are going to try to figure out, what do we do now? So, boy, that was like a time warp at 7:55. So I'm going to stop our recording in these moments. And thank you for paying attention. Man, I feel I'm going to have to work on this lesson, to be honest with you. I'm going to have to work on it to shorten it, make it more brief. And also, I don't feel like we had any sort of moments of encounter. I feel like I gave you information this week. And so I'm going to have to work on, you know how much I like to lean on inspiration and devotion. I don't feel like you're leaving like loving Jesus more when you came in. I feel like you're leaving maybe smarter. And hopefully God can move you towards the mission of Christ-likeness in future weeks when the rest of the Bible can make sense, because you now have a context to understand what's going to happen. I hope. We'll see. I'm not even going to pray to close the